Okay, hi everybody. So today we're focusing on 7.2, storing and retaining of memories. So we talked in 7.1 about processing that information and coding that information. That would be the typing of it. Now we're going to focus on the storing of it, or actually getting it into your hard drive of your memory. The objective for today is for you all to describe how memories are stored and retained by reading a short article on Candle and Schwartz's research and creating a diagram. So before you read the article, we're going to go over just some basic information on storing and retaining memories. This is a sea slug right here. This guy's going to be important when we get to that slide, but just so you know, that's what a sea slug looks like. They're kind of cool. All right. Storing memory, how we store it. So there is sensory memory, which we talked about in 7.1, and sensory memory is where you are retaining the information from your senses. So we have iconic and echoic, I always say that wrong, I apologize, memory. Iconic memory is, think about iconic eyes. This is information that you see. We all have a very brief moment of photographic memory. We can process the information that we see, we store it for a moment, but it usually is fleeting, meaning it doesn't stay. One example of this is Sperlig's flashcards, which I'll show you here in a moment. The second type is echoic, and this is echo, right? So you hear memory, and this means that you have this actual auditory memory where you actually do retain everything you hear. So when your parents or teachers say, "Do you hear me?" and you aren't listening to us, well, in all reality, you actually are listening. You're just not storing the memory because you don't think it's important. Okay, so this is Sperlig's flashcards. Oh, sorry, we're going to go back. There we go. This is Sperlig's flashcards. What Sperlig realized is that when it came to photographic memory, he would flash this card in front of people for a fraction of a second and ask them how much they remembered, and they weren't very accurate. It was about 50%. Then once he told people to focus on one line, let's say the middle line, and ask them to recall it, they could recall it with nearly 100% accuracy. So we do process information, photographic memory, but it does have to be something specific. The second type of memory, so we know sensory is just everything that you sense. Then it moves into working or short-term memory. And remember, working memory is that continuously processing information. What we found with working or short-term memory is that the magic number for working and short-term memory is about 7 numbers or 7 items plus or minus. So, plus or minus 2. There is a reason why phone numbers originally were 7 numbers. Now, granted, you have to sometimes add a 3-digit area code onto that, but there is a reason why that happens. There is a reason why your social security number is going to be 8 digits, right? It's this idea of this magic number 7. And then finally, long-term memory is limitless. So good for you. You get to learn as much information as we can possibly put in there. It never gets full. Now, how do we store these memories? Okay, so long-term potentiation, LTB, says that there's an increase in the synapse firing potential after a brief and rapid stimulation. And this was done by Kendall and Schwartz with the sea slugs. What they found is in your synapse, that's the end of your nerve in your brain, is that after that was stimulated, there was an increase in the ability for that to fire, that neuron to pass information. So this is important because it shows us that if we stimulate parts of your brain or different neurons in the synapse of that neuron, it is more likely to fire, which means you are more likely to learn information. So how do we get that to be stimulated? How does that happen? Well, it happens in two ways. First is by a protein called Krebs protein. And the second is by a neurotransmitter named glutamate. Now, in some cases, we see this happening naturally, which is fine. But what we found is that when we make these happen by either giving you a protein or increasing this neurotransmitter in your brain, there are actually massive side effects to being able to do that. So even though by doing these two things, it does actually allow you to remember things more, there are lots of side effects in making that happen. Another way that we can store memories is when we have stress hormones happen. And when we have stress hormones in our body, it's usually because there's a traumatic event. And so we're more likely to remember that information. And we call that a flashbulb memory, something emotionally significant or emotional memory. Where were you on September 11th? Where were you when JFK was assassinated? Those are the types of things that you probably remember very clearly. And that's because of the stress hormones in your body at that time. So there's two types of long-term memories and two ways that we can store these. The first is explicit and declarative. The second is implicit, non-declarative, procedural. So we'll go through explicit and then implicit. Explicit memories are with conscious recall. Okay, so you are trying to think of them, you're trying to remember them. This is processed in the hippocampus part of your brain. This is where we store facts, general knowledge, and personally experienced events. Over to the other side, implicit or non-declarative. This happens without conscious recall. This happens in other parts of your brain, including your cerebellum. These are things like skills, motor, and cognitive and classical conditioning. So a lot of times muscle memory, if you remember how to do things physically with your motor skills, that's implicit memory. Explicit is like you can tell me when JFK was assassinated. All right, retaining information in the brain. How do we get it to stay there? So now if I stored it there, how do I get it to stay there? Well, there's a couple things. First is the frontal lobe. Again, that's the front part of your brain. That's what we call working memory. The right part of your frontal lobe deals with visual. The left part of your frontal lobe deals with more facts and things like passwords, for example. The second part that retains information in your brain is a part called the hippocampus, which is located in your limbic system. And this is where it saves the explicit memory, so facts. When was JFK assassinated? And then your cerebellum stores your implicit memories. So those are the things that, movement, for example. And then we have the basal ganglia, and that, again, works well with the cerebellum in controlling your motor memories, so how to move your body and actual motor skills. And that is it for today.